Hello, it's week 6, sorta. Hard to believe that we're all the way to the end of this session. And so I am doing this a little early, and I will, just so that we bring closure here a little bit before instead of waiting till Saturday or Sunday. So I will do the regular, a few little housekeeping things, and then the talk about the chapters, and then leave it at that. Okay, first of all, housekeeping things. The only thing that you have left is the test that was posted on Thursday and yesterday, and then the 2 forum posts, well, 3 counting the one for Thursday, and then 1 for Monday and Tuesday. And your test, recall, are not due until Tuesday at noon. I will not accept them late. And the reason is quite simply because I won't have time to grade them if people are turning them in late. And the process gets held up when you turn in things late because I grade them all at once. You know, I read question one, I get question one's answer in my head, and then I read everybody's answer to question 1, 2, etc. So please keep that in mind. I think probably the biggest issue is when will you get grades? When I get them up. We have, I think, until Thursday. It might be until Friday, but I'll get them up. I am leaving town, or I've left town, and but you can still reach me. Just send me an email because it's blocked off on my office hours, but you could still email me and we could still meet. We wouldn't be able to meet in person because I'm actually in Florida. And I want to, we can meet FaceTime or by phone call or whatever. So Skype, Zoom, whatever. I've got them all. So just go ahead and email me if you need to talk to me. I taken a little bit of time because I haven't had any time off, and I'm taking some before classes start again in the fall. I think that's pretty much it. Let me relook at the schedule. This week is short. They're just 4 chapters. 3 have to do with intercultural communication issues, gender communication issues, which is part of intercultural communication. And then the last chapter is a synopsis of what we've talked about this semester. If you have any other questions, just let me know. Excuse me, someone's at my door. It's always something. Anyway, so I think that's pretty much it as far as housekeeping things. If there's anything else, and again, be patient. You can look and see where your grades stand through the grade book. If you send me extra credit, I will look at that. I will not mark any grammar in it. I will read it 100% for content only. All right. I'll be taking, because it takes time for me to mark the grammar. So I will be using the same rubric, but the points are a little different because there are only 25 points available out of this. So. Okay, let's go ahead and look at the chapters that we have for this week. And we start with chapter 34, which is about gender communication. It's one of my areas of expertise, although last time I taught it, my students told me I was too old to understand about it. I was like, I do research, so I'm not too old. The aspect of genderlect has to do with just sorry, opening my book and I forgot to do it before we started. How men and women communicate differently, but actually when we use the word gender, I want you to keep in mind that there's a difference between gender and sex, all right? And we begin this section on gender and communication with a discussion of how men and women communicate differently, but how masculine and feminine people communicate differently also. I always to make the differentiation between the two as sex is, a fact, as it tells you that in the PowerPoint, is a fact, and gender is an idea. Now, sex is male or female, all right? Gender is really a continuum. You have masculine at one end and feminine at the other, and androgyny in the middle. So more people are, more people who are male are masculine and more people who are female are feminine, but that's not 100% true. All right. I actually happen to be androgynous, and that's a brain thing. All right. I dress femininely, I like feminine things, but my brain works more masculine, which is I'm more assertive, I'm more competitive. These are things that are, if you go back to what we talked about in the earlier chapters there about a masculine culture, all right, it's the same sort of thing. So anyway, gender, when people ask me my gender and then they give me the choice of male or female, it's like, yeah, that's incorrect. And in the research in our area, even the researchers sometimes do that, right? Refer to sex as gender. All right, so what we're talking about here is more feminine ways of communicating, more masculine ways of communicating, and that becomes part of it. There is one thing I do want to point out, that there are more similarities, all right, amongst men and women and masculine and feminine than there are differences, and a lot of people neglect to remember that aspect of it. One of the things that research has found is that there's greater variability between how women communicate than how men communicate. All that means is that men often communicate similarly, and women, it could be anything that you find, because there's just more variability. So let's go ahead and look at chapter 34, and this is the concept of called genderlect, which is a play on dialect, all right, which is the words and things that you do, the choices that you make grammatically, all those kinds of things. This is an area where we find things of how men and women approach different things. One of the things that they talk about, one of the first things they talk about in this chapter has to do with, and Deborah Tannen is the foremost researcher in the area of gender communication. Another one is Julia Wood, and we'll talk a little bit about some of her research also. What Tannen starts with is how men and women approach problems with each other. All right, men want to solve the problem and women want to talk about it. So you're going to see a good discussion about that. And probably most of y'all have been in that situation before. It's kind of fun to talk to people about that, because it's like, oh, yeah, there is a difference there. All right, so problem solving versus just being able to talk about the problem. Most of you men probably hate that when it happens, and most of you women probably hate it when the man or the person who's the masculine communicator, all right, wants to solve it for you right away. It's like, no, I just want to talk about it. And it's like, and the guy's going, well, I just don't want to hear about it. So those are just some differences. A lot of people say that masculine and feminine communication should be looked at as two different styles of communication. And then a lot of people say, no, they shouldn't. They should be looked at as some people have some, and some people have other aspects of both masculine and feminine communication. There is some research that says that the feminine style of communication seeks more human connection, connecting with others, talking with others. Some research says that masculine communication is more about status and competition. control in the actual conversation and so on. So, and you'll see a good discussion of that in the textbook as well as the PowerPoint. One of the biggies is one of the biggie issues is what the textbook refers to as rapport talk versus report talk. So rapport, R-A-P-P-O-R-T, all right, versus report, R-E-P-O-R-T talk. Lots of good things there, you know. Private speaking versus public speaking and how both masculine styles and feminine styles approach that. Telling a story, all right? What's the more masculine way to tell a story? What's the more feminine way to tell a story? So, and lots of y'all go, oh yeah, make sure you read it because there's some good stuff in there. It's like, oh, no wonder I have problems in my relationships. Listening, men and women listen differently. Men and women back channel differently, which back channel is if I'm talking to you and you're nodding your head, all right, that's back channeling. That'll keep me talking, all right. Basically what I'm doing is telling you I'm with you, I'm listening, all right. Cooperative overlap happens more in feminine communication, all right, as opposed to interruption. And interruption happens more in masculine approaches, and you know, and men and women interrupt for different reasons. Women more often interrupt to say that they're listening, back channeling, you know, trying to get some information in there. And research has shown that the masculine approach usually is interruption to take over the conversation. Not always. So these are generalizations. Don't get all bent out of shape with me about this. These are just research things. How do you ask questions? All right. Masculine, feminine do it differently. How do you conflict? All right. Men and women do it differently. Masculine style does it differently than feminine style. More masculine style, of course, is competitive. All right, so which ways? Nonverbal communication is another way that we have differences in that rapport versus report talk. Tannen, by the way, doesn't really go much into the nonverbal area. She was more about the speaking area, but nonverbal communication is a part of this too. The biggie thing is that women usually grow up and men usually grow up in different speech communities, how you were raised, all right? And most of you all were raised a certain way. You men probably were told, oh, don't do this, it's sissy. And you women were told things like, don't do this, it's not ladylike, all right? So we're brought up in different speech communities. And hopefully it will help you when you read this chapter and listen to the PowerPoint, go through the materials, you'll begin to say, oh, I get it now. I see where some of the differences are, right? Which is kind of the fun thing about studying gender communication. The ethical issue that they raise, of course, is that it's too generalized, all right? We have a tendency to generalize out of this research quite a bit. So make sure that you realize that. You know, and there are a lot of people who didn't think that this was the best approach, you know, that this was not, this was more prescriptive, and some people thought it should be more descriptive. So, and probably the biggest critique, which isn't so much in this chapter, is that times have changed, right? Even in the last 10, 15, 20 years, 5 years, the approaches to masculine and feminine styles, male and female styles, have changed a great deal. So I think you'll enjoy the chapter on the genderlect, because what it does is it leads into chapter 35, which is called standpoint theory, and that's Harding and Woods. And I mentioned before that Julia Wood has spoken and done quite a bit of research, and she is a communication theorist. Deborah Tannen is not. Deborah Tannen was actually a psychology theorist. So I do want to backtrack for a minute about into chapter 34 about androgyny. I think, you know, the good old Saturday Night Live skits, which most of y'all don't see now anymore, except if you're going to one of the the old skits, back to, unless you watch the anniversary shows. Uh, they had two characters called Pat and Chris, and what they did was they both were clearly sexless. That's not what androgyny means. What androgyny means is that you're sort of middle of the road on that masculine and feminine. You have masculine, if you're androgynous, you have both masculine and feminine characteristics. And I myself consider myself to be androgynous. And Julie Wood, who's in the next chapter, said the same thing once publicly at a gathering in Washington, D.C. Let's take Nina over there. She's about as androgynous as they come. I was like, I am? Not a clue. So, of course, then I started researching, well, what does that mean? But it just means that, thought-wise, emotion-wise, you get both masculine and feminine characteristics. So, okay, back to chapter 35, is standpoint theory. And this just says, this is how I view the world, all right? A place from which to critically view the world around us, as the textbook says. All right. And, basically what that standpoint is a synonym for is a viewpoint, right? Your perspective, your outlook, and your position. So all this means, folks, is from your point of view, this is how it is out there. So if I'm a woman, my standpoint theory is likely to be a whole lot different than if I were a man. All right. The standpoint, who you are, how you were brought up, etc. This chapter goes into some of the issues about feminism. Let me point out that Julia Wood is extremely adamant about this point, that anybody can be a feminist, because the true definition of feminism is equal treatment for all people, regardless of their sex, right? Of course, it has been turned into other things by people who label it things like feminazi and that kind of thing. Any of us who believe in equal treatment for all people, regardless of their sex, should consider ourselves feminists, all right? No discrimination based on male or female. That's what that means. All right. And, and if you go read the research, folks, nobody ever burned a bra. It was a metaphor. All right. So keep that in mind. So, we're not talking about these people that are radical. Yeah, there are some radical feminists. That's not saying that. But there are some radical masculinists also in this world. So, all right. The whole process of understanding feminist standpoint leads us into thinking about women as being a marginalized group. All right. The standpoint position gets into some of that about whether, autonomy versus connectedness, and women more often lean towards the connectedness, and masculine or men lean more towards the autonomy, take care of yourself. But today in our society, all right, most women will tell you, oh no, I take care of myself. So women in our society lean more towards that autonomy. So, and the difference is evident in your actual communication, and good discussion in the textbook about language choices you make and things you say, and thoughts that come out because of your standpoint. One of the concepts that Wood and Harding talk about is local knowledge. And what that means is that that's your knowledge based on your time in that space, all right? Situated in time and place, experience, relative power, and so on. Okay, this is how I view it from my standpoint, right? So this is a theory that thinks that objectivity is extremely important, being strongly objective. We have a tendency in this area to be very subjective. Let's go back to that term, feminist. Most of you all have a very subjective response to a term like that, all right? But what Wood and Harding would say is, no, we need to be objective. So when we define feminism as equal treatment of all people, all right, then the objective standpoint would be, we're looking at this fairly, that all people are treated fairly. You know, we're aiming for things like not being partial to one sex or the other, not trying to distort one side or the other. Try to aim for to avoid false reasoning. So, talk about superior subordinate status, and because in a lot of countries, although the glass ceiling is raising and raising and busting in many places, the superior subordinate relationship is often still, even if the woman is in that position, all right, from top down, is still more a masculine approach to communication from top down, because that's what our culture values, and so that becomes part of our standpoint. Talks quite a bit about, well, not quite a bit, but a little bit about whether or not women's lives are still based around caregiving, and what does that do, right? A good discussion about the standpoint of Black feminist thought, because Black feminists, all right, have two issues going on there. Not only the minority of being African American, but also the minority of being women. So they've got double duty there that they're dealing with. So the critique is probably a decent one. It's this, the postmodernist critique would say that we reject any assumptions, a priori assumptions, which means this is how it is, all right, or this is how I think it is. So the critique is also good, is like, if we're going to talk about marginalized people, shouldn't we be aiming for a better overall view than just one person's standpoint? So that is a pretty good critique of that. Okay, and chapter 36 is muted group. Simple one, all right? There are muted groups all over. Now, they put this as part of the gender area, and the reason they do is because there's been a lot of talk that females have been more marginalized and more muted than other groups. So, but any type of minority is often considered to be a muted group. And quite simply, what a muted group is, that group's words are discounted in society. That group's thoughts are devalued. Then what happens when that group speaks up, all right, then another group, all right, is trying to control the communication that takes place. That's where I just said about, even though you have women who have broken through the glass ceiling, they still have masculine communication characteristics that have gotten them there. So, all right. So muted group, of course, what they're saying is women are a muted group. So that they have less power to speak up. But you all could name other muted groups. Students would consider themselves to be any minority group. And anyone who feels that they have been put upon by a majority of society. All right. One good discussion about using sports metaphors in communication. Because most of the sports that the metaphors come from are masculine sports. So you'll want to look carefully at that one. There's also a good discussion in there about who are the gatekeepers of this communication. And of course, what they say, of course, is that men are the gatekeepers. I wouldn't say that's 100% true anymore. By this point in time, you probably are realizing that not everybody always agrees. There are different theorists and different theories, and different people have different views. All right, so the gatekeepers, we talked about those back in the mass media, back in the agenda setting area, but these will be editors, other people, who control what you have to say and what you do. All right, so you want to make sure you look at that about the gatekeepers. Then there's a good discussion in this chapter about speaking online, like online communication and flaming, and there are different types of online communication that you do. Online education, which is what you're doing here, different blogs that you might use, wikis, but then there's a whole lot more with social media, which they don't go into in this chapter. So social media is an extremely important aspect of muted groups. Who speaks more in media? All right. So pay attention to that aspect in this chapter also. But think about other ways that you communicate online. Good discussion in here about networking aspects of being online and masculine and feminine approaches. Good discussion about sexual harassment and how sexual harassment is not just, sexual intercourse, all right? It's also things like things people say, or things where people send the message that one sex of the person, could be male or female, it happens more to women, but it still happens to men, that job is not for that person, all right, because they are female or they are male. And so we get back to that muted group there. It's like, okay, so what happens here? Right? The biggest one there is hostile environment. Most of y'all think automatically about, sexual intercourse when somebody says sexual harassment. No, right? Has to do with hostile environment also. And if somebody's created a hostile environment for you because you are male or you are female, all right, then that's a form of sexual harassment. In other words, a place that's uncomfortable to be. And in most cases, we apply that to the workplace. The discussion about date rape and how rape is rape, and regardless of whether this person is your romantic partner, and so on. And then a good discussion about how people in muted groups talk to people who are in the dominant groups. And the critique is an interesting one. It basically asks the question, do men mean to mute women? All right. And then the answer is quite simply, some do, some don't. Right? So anyway, those are the chapters. The last chapter is chapter 37. And quite frankly, folks, it's a review. It's common threads in communication theories. It takes everything we've talked about in the course of the session, all right, and breaks it down. And it's simple. I didn't do a PowerPoint on it because you really want to keep this handout, all right? When you talk about motivational theories, lists 3 for you: social exchange theory, social penetration theory, uses and gratification theory. Talks about self-image. What theories apply there? All right. Talks about credibility. What comm theories apply there? Talks about expectations. What theories apply there? And I've got them all listed out for you. All right. So, and your last forum post is going to be one. You're going to choose one or more of these and say, this is the one that I like the best. This is the one I resonate with the best. So, and it, again, quite honest, there's not going to be any questions out of this chapter. All right. Well, you've probably seen that already in the test, but except I do ask you to tell me which one you like the best and why, and how would you study it. So, okay. If you have any questions, let me know. I do want to tell you, I have enjoyed having you all in my class this session. Online education is for some of you and isn't for some of you. I think some of you all discovered that this session because you have to keep up with it. But I think all of you all have done a great job. I think you've done a wonderful job of answering the forum questions. You do exactly what I ask you to do and are not offensive to other people. And for me, that's a win. I hope to see some of y'all in class this summer. I think I noticed on my rolls that 1 or 2 of you are in my nonverbal class in the fall. I'll look forward to meeting you face to face. And again, please let me know if you need to talk to me. I am out of town, but we can meet via FaceTime, telephone. You can email me your questions, whatever you've got. Hope to see y'all again. Thanks for a great session. Bye.